Welcome to the Dr. Dad's podcast, where a naturopath and chiropractor come together each week to share lifestyle medicine, health advice, and inspiring interviews with some of the top experts in health and wellness, bringing you the latest in nutrition, exercise, ancient healing, toxins and detox, your microbiome, mindset, hormones, brain, and much more. Stay tuned. We're going to teach you how to experience growth daily.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Dad's podcast. I'm here with my main man, Dr. David Wardy. How you doing? What's new?
I'm well today, buddy. How are you, brother? I'm good, man.
Good. David's been blowing up on Instagram, sharing his magician stuff, and it's amazing just seeing what you're doing to wake people up to energy medicine and helping people to make that connection between their brain, their body. It's been really awesome to see. So I just wanted to give you a little shout out before
Thank you, brother.
Before we go, just to make sure people run over to check out the Wardy Wellness Instagram account, because it's really, really cool what you're doing, buddy.
Well, it's a team effort, man. I've got my videographer right here with me because we're trying a studio run for the podcast today. But
okay, nice.
I can't take all the credit, man. I got a really gifted guy that helps me out with all that stuff. So
yeah. It's very cool. I mean, I gotta say, like the interesting part about it is that you don't always get to see what happens kind of behind the scenes when you're in a visit with somebody, and you do such a good job of explaining, what's going on and how where the body gets stuck and how that brain to body communication can really break down. And so really, really cool stuff, guys. If you haven't checked it out, go check out the IG account. But today we're going to be talking about communication, but on a biochemical level. This is fun stuff. We get to talk to a gentleman here. His name is Don Moxley, and he's a longevity expert. He's been diving into the biomechanics, or I guess biochemical aspect of healing through understanding more about HRV, which we'll break down, the science of autophagy and what it means to live a long, healthy life, and be in this mindset of longevity, which I think is such an important one. We live in a world that is just confounded with so much stress, toxicity, trauma, abuse, self-abuse to the body, and boatloads of information. It's really hard to find our way with it all. And having people in this space that are teaching on health span and how to live not just longer, but live healthier is such a gift and blessing to the world. So he's part of a company that created a product called a Mode and Method, which is for optimizing HRV, which we'll talk about. And then we're going to talk a lot about spermidine, potato.
Either either.
Yeah, which we'll dive into. So Don, there's so much to discuss with you. So thank you so much for showing up with us here in the Dr. Dad's today.
My pleasure, fellas, and it's certainly my honor, and I'm blessed to be to be introduced to your tribe. So thank you.
Appreciate you. So let's just start with longevity. What does that mean to you? Because this is starting to really become more well known with the discussion of blue zones and things like that around the world. Where for those of you who maybe don't know what the blue zones are, these are pockets or areas on the planet where people are living exceptionally long lives by comparison to the metrics or standards of global population. Where maybe in parts of the world, US might be around, like, I can't remember what it is, 75, 76, maybe something like that.
It's up to 76 now.
76. But these blue zones, people are living into their hundreds, definitely into their ninth decade, possibly beyond. And so there's definitely more and more awareness about the science of longevity. So what got you into all this stuff, Don?
Well, I'm going to approach three different things here as we talk about what is longevity. And I like to think of longevity in my life as thirds. I spent the first third of my life learning in school, taking in information. And then I spend the second third of my life, what I call earning, serving others, raising a family, working for other people. Now, my wife and I, our daughter moved out of our home a little over 2 years ago in January. We lived in a little town outside of Columbus, Ohio, and my daughter played lacrosse at Ohio State and went on to go coach at Northwestern. And when she moved out, I looked at my wife and I said, we're done now. she's not coming home. She's got a real job. It's now, and I call it my third, our third. This is the third of our life that's ours. We're not committed to someone else. It's we get to figure it out. And at the time, what was funny is that when my wife and I were first married, this was early on in our marriage, we were skiing out in Colorado over Christmas one year, and we were in a realtor office looking at properties and so forth. And I said, we could do this, because at the time I was a university professor and she was a school teacher, and I said, we can do that here. Well, we came back east, and a few months later we found out we're pregnant. So all our family was back in Ohio. So we stayed there. Well, the pregnancy moved out January 2nd, 2 years ago. And all of a sudden we entered our third. And so we sold our house. I'm talking to you now from my office in our RV that we bought, and have been traveling the country ever since. We've been, in the last 24 months, we've been in 34 states. We're looking for a new place to live. Ohio was a great place, but I want to drink my coffee looking at mountains or an ocean or something. We've spent a lot of time up by you, Nick, up in the Pacific Northwest. We really like that. But my daughter's coaching at Pittsburgh now. She's over at the University of Pittsburgh. So we came back east in, the beginning of the year to watch her work, and we're slowly working our way through this. But for me, longevity is that third. And this is our challenge, is that the average American, and I don't know if the Canadian data reflects this or not, but the average American now lives to 76.4 years old. So that's lifespan. That's the number of days you're breathing. But health span, the onset of morbidity, health span is only 62. So we have this 14-year deficit where, unless you pay attention to what you're doing, the medical system is going to stick a vacuum cleaner into your bank account and hoover it out. And you're going to spend the end of your life in a hospital or a home hooked to tubes. And that's not for me. I've said, my lifespan, if it ends while I'm hiking the Grand Canyon and I slip on the edge and I have a chance to enjoy the ride down, well, so be it. That'll be a great exit, right? I think of the movie Legends of the Fall with Brad Pitt, and they talk about him, the bear had killed him and he died a good death, is what the narrator says. But to me, life's longevity is about compressing morbidity. It's about bringing my morbidity out to my mortality. But I spent a lot of time coaching, working with elite athletes. I've coached Olympic medalists and pros and people in all level. But my favorite coaching job ever was my daughter's 7th grade field hockey team. I dug that, man. That was the most enjoyable coaching job I ever had. I'm looking forward to coaching my grandkids. And, I'm an old wrestler. I wrestled at Ohio State back in the early 80s and did pretty good. But 6 years ago, one of my nephews qualified for the Florida State High School Wrestling Tournament. And I was living in Florida at the time, so I got a chance to go over and work out with him. And he's a big kid. Physically, we're the same. We're about 6 feet tall, about 290 pounds, both pretty strong. And for one day, I had a wrestling skill set that could take advantage of him. The second day, I was a mess. I had no recovery. I mean, anybody could have beaten me the second day. But I want to be that crazy wrestler that still goes into a wrestling room when he's 70 and 80 years old. And listen, I'm only 8 years away from 70, so I'm in my 7th decade of life. I'm 8 years away from my 8th. And I want to be that. I want to be that person that can still go in and teach when I'm 70 or 80 years old. So that's what longevity means to me. It's about extending health span, compressing morbidity, so that the days that I am on this earth, I'm breathing, I'm vigorous, I'm enjoying it, and I'm taking advantage of all this other work I've done before that.
You brought up a really interesting point with that sort of age of illness onset. I can't remember exactly how you said that, but morbidity, like at 62 years old. That's wild to think of that. And obviously that's just the average. I mean, many people are deeper into disease or dis-ease earlier than that. But it's really interesting to sort of reflect on that. And then, you know, you hit another really important button, which is, you know, the government or whoever it is that's going to serve you in that state of dis-ease is just hoovering your hard-earned money away, which is so true. I mean, we live in a culture where we're so stuck deep into a reactive medicine that we're not really taking the time to reflect on our testing or get testing and assessment done to find out where we're stuck and do all the proactive things that we can do in order to, you know, reverse illness or prolong it, or like I love how you said, compress morbidity. Like, these are really important concepts for people just to open their eyes to and recognize that, do you really want to throw away all your hard-earned time and money to try to extend a life that is riddled with dis-ease and chronic illness and debilitation and pharmaceuticals? I mean, it's not the life that I don't think anyone wants to live that way. And yet we're all setting ourselves up for that reality. Well, not all of us.
Absolutely. And you know what's been really interesting? So when I started working for Longevity Labs, literally I got the phone call to come work for him while I was driving my mother. At the time, she was 84. I was driving my 84-year-old mother from Florida back up to Ohio. She had been down in Florida at my brother's place for the winter. We're driving her back up, and she had this cough. Now, my mother has always had this cough, okay? It's just been part of her. Well, when we got back, she goes to the doc, and she had been a cancer survivor from 15 years prior. But she goes to the doc the next day. They've got her in for a PET scan, and she's stage 4. They're like, listen, it's in your liver, it's in your bones, it's everywhere. And my mother was the strongest woman you ever met in your life. I mean, I was the smallest boy in the family. I watched her knock my older brother out when he was a sophomore in college. I mean, knocked him out cold. We had a big old farm. We farmed almost 1,000 head of cattle in eastern Ohio, and she was, I don't know if you follow Yellowstone, but she would have been the lead character on Yellowstone. So all of a sudden, my father passed away 15 years prior. My mother has this life between Ohio and Arizona, and she's doing good. We're riding her pretty hard about lifting weights and doing the things that she needs to do to maintain health span. But she gets this diagnosis, and I'll tell you, it was interesting. She said, I'm done. I'm doing hospice. I'm not doing radiation. I'm not doing chemo. I'm 84 years old. I'm done. And she passed in about 7 months. It went pretty quickly, but she was sharp the whole time. She was physically limited only at the very end. And so it was interesting for me, having begun work for a longevity company, helping my mother go through this, and watching this. And now my wife has a father that's 85 years old, who's the other side of the spectrum. This guy has incredible morbidity, has difficult moving, and he is going to spend the last 5-6 years of his life in a bed. And my wife said to me, she said, what can we do? And I said, we've done a lot. We've thrown a lot of stuff at this guy to try to make his life better. But the fact is, if he wanted this time of life to be better, he needed to start investing in it 20 years ago. That you have to have the awareness. And, people ask me about our product. When should you start taking spermidine? And my answer is usually, well, do you have a 401k or are you investing for retirement? Because if you're investing financially for retirement, you should probably be thinking about investing physically and nutritionally for retirement and what it's going to be. And the challenge is this. You guys know this. Our healthcare system is not designed to help you 20 years from now. You've got to own that, okay? It can. There are professionals out there. There are medical professionals out there that can help you with this strategy of living well for the next 20 years into your 80s, 90s, 100s. But you've got to own it. The system does not drive you that way. And that's what's so important. People have to understand that.
Go ahead, David.
Don, three things, buddy. First was I love the way you highlight your picture of what longevity means to you. Because it just seems as of late, we're constantly getting this picture of, oh, the human body can go to 140 and we're going to live twice our lifespan. And like it seems like that's the message that's kind of thrown out in the space most of the time. And it's refreshing to hear you just talk about something that's more a realistic picture of there's a problem because our healthcare system's not designed for this part of our lives, right?
No,
and then
absolutely.
two, it's like quality of life, right? I mean, that's what longevity is. It's like, okay, we want to have that health span pushing into those latter years and not be suffering those last 14 years of our life and be having constant health problems and financially being drained. And then the other point was, you're talking about there's a number of people that have 401ks and they have all these things set up for their retirement and the longevity of their money, but they spent no energy or awareness, like you're saying, of doing anything for their health almost their whole life, almost some of them. And so those 3 points, I mean, those are three huge nuggets that you just threw out, and I really appreciate you for that because it's refreshing to hear somebody come at it from this angle, man.
I really appreciate it. And but here's the point. It's relatively easy, okay, and it's relatively inexpensive if you get started early. When we look at, I do a talk, and I'll send you guys a link. We can put it in the show notes where I talk about longevity and we talk about what if you want to live longer, you got to figure out what's going to kill you. Okay, that's what's important. Okay, and when you're young, when you're very young, it's probably some kind of a genetic disorder or an accident that's going to take you out. Middle age, you're not listening to your mother's advice. You're not wearing a seatbelt. You're not wearing a helmet. You're not doing something like that. That's going to take you out the majority of the times in middle age. But by the time you're 40, the thing that's going to punch your ticket is going to be inflammatory related disease, cancer, some poor immune response. There's going to be something in that space that it's inflammation, we call it. That's what's going to take you out. This is relatively easy. Listen, exercise. First of all, I'm a guy that came from the exercise industry, okay? I graduated in 1985 with a master's degree in exercise physiology. I've been working in health clubs and teaching and working in this space ever since. The exercise industry has failed. They failed dramatically because we don't have gyms full of people 40 to 90 doing the things they need to do to lower inflammation, improve mobility, and improve health span. It's just not there. It's full of their kids and their grandkids, but they're not the ones that really benefit from it. It winds up being more of a dating service than it is a longevity space. So this is what's such a challenge with this, and we have so much access to the tools that we need. Quality food. Okay. Now this can be a challenge for some populations. I don't want to minimize that at all. That's a big deal. But when you figure it out, it's possible to get on top of that. Movement. You cannot minimize the value of movement. And this is in the video. I call it my 4 rocks in the jar of longevity. What are the 4 things you need? You need movement. You hack it with exercise. You need nutrient dense food. You hack that with supplements. You got to figure out what's not in your food and supplement that. It's not about proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. That may be what makes you look nice in your first third or second third. That may be how you manage that. But when we start talking about longevity, it's the micronutrients. Okay, and this is what's so important. You hack nutrient dense food with supplements. You cannot underestimate the value of sleep. Okay, we have minimized sleep as an asset for decades. we've embraced these people. I didn't sleep at all last night, and we hear the stories in college. I pulled an all-nighter. Well, when someone tells me that, I tell you you're an idiot. Okay, because not only did you not learn anything, you're not able to bring that back on the test the next day. We know this. Okay, so sleep, you can't hack sleep, but you can hack the sleep environment, which is really important. Then finally, my fourth rock I call light. Okay, getting into the environment and getting light on your skin at the right time of day and in the right volumes is so important. Now, those are the four rocks. The jar, though, the jar is the jar of purpose. Okay, what is it that what you wake up to do every day? Okay, what is it that drives you? You know, when you're young, we set these athletic goals or business goals or things like that. Well, I want to challenge people. I like to call these trainable life events. What are events in your life that will be better if you invest physically, nutritionally, recover, and if you invest, if it's your grandkid's wedding, if it's the trip of a lifetime with your spouse to Bali, whatever, okay? That's the reason you engage in the four rocks, but you've got to keep that purpose out there. You've got to hang those events. And little micro events might be walking a 5K or doing a hike, going on a trip. One of the great things about living in the RV, I've been in 10 national parks in the last year. Okay. This has been awesome. And, people don't get to 10 national parks in their lifetime. And to be able to get out and hike and do these things, I got no intention of stopping. Okay. And like I said, if I run into a bear, so be it. Okay. If it's a mountain lion that gets me, so be it. But I'm not going to exit this place in a bed. Or if I do, that's not me. And I think this is what people need to start thinking about. What is your purpose? Do you want to see your grandkids? Maybe you don't like your kids. You don't want to see your grandkids. I get it. Figure out maybe it's a trip to Bali. Maybe it's a trip to San Antonio. Maybe it's a trip to El Paso. Maybe it's a trip to Vancouver. These are all great places to take it in and just makes life so much better. And I think this is what's so important. But you got to get started early. And if you're 40 years old and you're listening to this, if you're 50 or 60, you start the process today because you're working for 4 decades from now. You start today to do 2 decades of work to get the last 2 decades on the back end. And I think this is where people can really start to get their head around.
Love that. The message is so strong and it's so important. So you touched on something with regards to sleep, and this is one of your flagship products is Motive Method, and talking about HRV. David and I love talking about HRV. We've had podcasts on it, but this is such an important one. I'd love to hear you describe HRV and then talk about the some of the studies that you did on some of the athletes and how you were able to predict like champions. But yeah, let's dive into HRV because I think that's a really, really good segue.
So I was introduced to HRV almost 35 years ago. I was teaching at a small college, a small community college. Well, it's kind of a big community college in Columbus, and we built a human performance lab, and we put some technology in there where I was teaching my students to be personal trainers and fitness professionals. And we wanted them to do assessment, and I bought this product from Polar, the heart rate monitor company. And we had a lot of success, and Polar came after me and they said, listen, we want you to, they basically talked me out of leaving academics and going to the dark side of sales. And so professors don't get paid a ton. So you look at it. So all of a sudden I am in the front seat of this Polar bus and I'm getting a look at technology like I'd never seen before. At the time we were teaching our students to measure heart rate with 2 fingers on the carotid. Okay. When you start looking at wearable technology, this is dinosaur. This is Fred Flintstone, paddle foot cars compared to a Tesla. That's the difference. So all of a sudden I've got this heart rate monitor that I can sit down and create this incredible history of all my work and use that to inform what I'm doing moving forward. Huge breakthrough for me. Well, at the time, they had this technology. It was called Own Zone, Own Index, and it was based on this thing called heart rate variability, which was a physiological measurement from Russia. The Russian space program discovered it. The Finns operationalized it because Polar is a Finnish company. And I'm like, wow, this is really cool, because even today, we hear people talk about improved longevity through improved VO2. Okay, I'm not putting an 80-year-old on a treadmill and measuring their VO2. That's batshit crazy. But I can see improved VO2 and cardiovascular fitness through nighttime resting heart rate. If your nighttime resting heart rate's going down, you're physiologically more fit. Well, these devices now tell us what HRV is too, which is a measurement of your stress system, how your system reacts, how much resiliency you have in your system. So if a bear walks around the corner and your hippocampus said, "Oh, that's life-threatening," it tells it tells your adrenals, "Okay, spill yourself so that we have enough energy to get away from the bear," or whatever it is. And HRV goes to 8 milliseconds at that point. So I'm playing with this. I'm playing with this technology. I had a facility in this little town I worked in that I'd closed and I'd moved it into my home. I had this great rec room on my house and I turned it into a pretty cool lab. I'm one of those guys. And the wrestling coach at the time from Ohio State calls me and says, "Hey, I've got a wrestler I'm struggling with. I can't figure out what's going on. Can you work him up?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, bring him over." Well, I wire this guy up. At the time, I'm using a piece of technology called Zephyr. It was an Australian company, or maybe they were New Zealand. I forget. But anyway, I wire this guy up. I'm going to put him on a bike ergometer and see what he can do. But when I wire him up at first, he had not wrestled for 2.5 days. Okay, basically recovering for 2.5 days. This is 9 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday morning. I wire him up. His resting RMSSD, the HRV number most people recognize, is 13 milliseconds, and which is full bear in the room stimulus. And I thought, this is interesting. So I had him go over and lay down in the facility, lays down, heart rate climbs to 100, HRV climbs to 110 milliseconds. Okay, laying down, stands up, boom, drops right back down to 13 milliseconds. That's my first sign. Okay. I put him on the bike. He comes off about half of what he should come off at. And I said to the coach, I said, "So here's what's going on with your guy." I said, "He's maladapting to your training. He's not adapting. He's maladapting." And if you want, and very talented wrestler. And I said, "If you want this kid to do well for you, you've got to start training him for what he's ready for, not what you think he should do." Now, to put this in perspective, Ohio State had a wrestler who was just inducted to the USA Wrestling Hall of Fame. He had won 3 national titles and was coming back to win his 4th. And we had 3 freshmen that eventually then went on to make All-American status for all four-time All-Americans. 2 of them were national titleists. 1 was an Olympic gold medalist. So very talented group of freshmen with this 4-timer. But the challenge is to win a title in wrestling, you need 5 or 6 point scores. Even if all 4 guys win a title, you've probably only got 84, 85 points. You kind of need 90 or more. So you need someone else to earn some points. So we've got this kid. We adjust his training. I basically modify 9 workouts on this guy. I modified his sleep environment. I sat him down. I said, "Listen, I need you to spend the night by yourself. I need your girlfriend somewhere else." I said, "I don't care what you guys do before you split up. I don't care. I just want you to finish your business and get in your own bed. Whether you're going home to yours or she's going home to hers, I just want that. I want that room blacked out. I want you to build a cave." So girlfriend was pissed. but we got it worked out. He started to get some recovery. We modified literally for about 10 days after we started. There was no live wrestling. All he could do was drill, because every time we started live wrestling, his HR would spike, his HRV would dive. And I'm like, nope, you're not ready. Your body's not giving you the resources. Now, simultaneously, I'm bringing him over to my facility, putting on my bike ergometer, and we were doing watt-driven workload. I have a bike that's called a Velotron that I can program watt by watt, minute by minute. And I was doing work specifically for where his thresholds were. And you slowly saw that HRV start to creep up. And we sent him to nationals that year with a resting RMSSD of 75 milliseconds. And from 13, we were able to move it. I mean, and again, this is a very talented college wrestler. And he made All-American, finished 5th in the country. And Ohio State wins the national title. And all of a sudden, everybody that thought I was a kook are like, okay, tell us about your voodoo. And so started working with the team more. We started a fairly extensive HRV program through a partnership with the Air Force Research Lab at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So my first 2 years, I had one device. My third year, I had 16. So all of a sudden, I've got data flowing, right? We collected 3.5 million data points on the team by 18 when I was there. When we started to understand recovery and resilience as an indicator of success, we were using like sensory deprivation float tanks. We floated that team 140 times in one season because it worked. It moved the needle. We sent 10 guys to nationals that year, first time in school history. We had 8 All-Americans, the most in school history. The 2 guys that didn't make All-American, I could have told you on the first day, because I couldn't get them there with a high enough RMSSD to be able to have the resilience to win the 5 matches that it took to make All-American. Probably, there's a lot of issues that can go with that, but that was my hardcore introduction to HRV. Now, what was so cool about this, and I love the way the universe kind of gives you a pathway, right? It kind of just keeps opening doors if you're willing to look through them. And I'm getting calls from guys around the country, pro guys around the country. What do you know about THC and HRV? And I'm like, I don't know anything about it. I said, my guys are NCAA athletes. That's against the rules. But I had worked with a guy out in New Mexico at a wearables company that was an HRV-based wearables company. We'd both left that company at the same time. He went into Oregon to cannabis, and I came back to Ohio State. He kept sending me notes. What do you know about this? And I just keep digging in, and I'm like, wow, there's something here that's really interesting that we don't understand. And he calls me one day and he says, do you want to work in cannabis? And I'm like, yes, I want to understand this. I want to get into this. I want to get in, and I wanted to dive into the deep end of the pot pool, right? So I go down to Florida. I take the job offer. I go down to Florida, and I'm the director of applied science for a cannabis brand down there. And when I don't know, Nick, I don't know what it's like in Canada with the fact that cannabis is fully regulated, right? The states is still messing around too much. But when you start to really look at cannabis, there's an incredible amount of research. Incredible. I mean, there are volumes and volumes of solid research that most people are not aware of. But I dove into the deep end of the pot pool, started learning, and I'm like, man, when you look at the health benefits of cannabis, and you look at when we look at the internal cannabinoid nervous system, you're like, there's part of your nervous system that's named after cannabis. And I've told this story 100 times. As a professor of exercise physiology, the endocannabinoid system should be chapter 2 of exercise 101. Okay. Literally, when it comes to anandamide, which is an endocannabinoid, and when it comes to brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a benefit of exercise, another ligand that's incredibly benefit for learning, that's why you exercise. Those two things right there. That's literally, if you need a reason, that's where you go. because it improves that the anandamide, that internal cannabinoid, the endocannabinoid is called the Zen molecule. It's where the runner's high comes from. So it was funny, you know, having gone through the traditional education system and going through the traditional college system, and then having the willingness to kind of, like I said, jump into the deep end of the pot pool to learn. It was incredible. So I'm telling the HRV story again. We start to see HRV as a benefit. We're watching wearables become more. When I first moved to Florida, I think we were using Oura Ring version 1s, the great big fat ones, if you remember. I was using products like First Beat, which is a Finnish. They're from Helsinki, Finland. That's what I was or Omega Wave, which was a Russian company. I don't even think they're around anymore. But we were using technology like that to measure HRV. It's gotten so much easier with good wearable technology. And for the listener, I think this is the important part. I'm sure you guys have said the minute before you die, the heartbeats before you die, your HRV will be 0. Okay, you'll be full sympathetic. Your body's going to be doing what it takes to keep you alive, and it's just not going to work. My Olympians have resting nighttime RMSSDs of 150 milliseconds average. Okay.
Wow.
If my wrestlers, if they couldn't achieve 75 milliseconds, they couldn't make All-American. 69 didn't make it. 75 did. So literally we saw a cut score. And we have multiple ends on both sides of that cut score. But so as humans, we want to be working our HRV away from 0. You know, everything you should be doing should be moving away from 0. Now, I talk to people every day. My HRV is 13, my HRV is 20, and the point I make to them, number one, you need to be working with a healthcare professional that understands this and can have this conversation. But going from 15 to 0 is a long path. Okay. It's going from 50 to 15 is, let me restate this. Going from 15 to 50 as an adult is as hard as it is to go from 15 to 0. Okay. So don't see that 15 and freak out. Don't let your HRV data cause stress. Use it as an indicator, but that's how HRV became so important to us. And while I'm working in Florida, my wife and daughter were living back in Ohio. I'm living down in North Palm Beach. My kitchen looked like Breaking Bad. I had gram scales and beakers all over the place. I was figuring out cannabinoids and terpenes and all the different things. I was figuring this out. And that's where Mode and Method came from. That I got a call one day from the president of our company and says, "Can we make a supplement that improves HRV?" I said, "Absolutely. I've already done it." And that's where, so modemethod.com, HRV is that supplement. It's a combination of cannabis extract, so it's CBD, but there's also equal amounts of CBDA and beta caryophyllene. Okay, those two are the secret weapon, but they're also carried in a DHA, EPA, omega-3 oil with it has what's called SPM, specialized pro-resolving mediators, because the number one driver of poor HRV in adults is inflammation. We've now gone full circle now. We've gone from inflammation as a tool for poor health span, perhaps ending lifespan, to where we're looking at it driving HRV response and using HRV as a key performance indicator in this process.
That's amazing. I mean, it's funny because I looked at the products before. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But it all came together when you started talking about the endocannabinoid system. I mean, it's amazing to see how that correlates, because I've heard this many times that it's like, you know, they named the receptor sites in our brain after the plant, just to show how integrated it is into our chemistry. That's fascinating. Dave and I mean, we, like I said, we talk about HRV all the time. And lately, since I've been doing a whole lot more running and training, I've actually noticed a drop to my HRV. because I probably been pushing it too hard. And so I would love to get my hands on this and see how I can manipulate those scores a little bit more. I use a Garmin and an Oura ring for those measurements.
Great tools. Listen, Garmin bought their algorithms from Firstbeat. So I love Garmin and what they do. I'll tell you something that I just found that I'm just discovering. So I now have my Velotron back in my rig. So my RV, if you could see behind my thing here, I have a sauna over my right shoulder. I have a red light system over my left shoulder. And I have a lab quality bike ergometer out in my rig that I ride the train on. So I'm using a tool from a company in Amsterdam called NowWatch, Nowatch. These guys took a Oura ring and cracked it open. And Oura, there's ex-Polar guys that started Oura. And so the chip circuits are made up in Kampeli, Finland, where Polar is based. And they developed a new tool, but they give me the ability to measure HRV in real time.
Wow.
Now, this is what's really important. Prior to this, if you would have asked me what happens to my HRV when I start exercising, I would say it goes down low. This is what we learned from Polar. That it drops down and there's no value in measuring it during exercise. Guys, I'm getting on my bike and I'm doing zone 1-2 work. Okay. My resting nighttime RMSSDs are anywhere from 35 to 65. That's my range that I'm typically in. I'm pulling RMSSDs during zone 1, zone 2 exercise, 250, 300. I am averaging 150 milliseconds for an hour of work doing zone 1-2 work. Okay.
That's amazing. Wow.
And literally, this is the first time I've talked about this really in public. So you guys are kind of getting the scoop here. We prescribe exercise using either O2, CO2, how much oxygen am I using, how much CO2 am I using, and we build our zones from that. Or we use lactate. Where do I get my lactate tilts, things like that. Neither one embraces zone 1, zone 2. Okay. But if you look at great cardiovascular athletes, cyclists, cross-country skiers, things like that, they do a boatload of what's called junk miles.
Yeah.
They just go out and turn the pedals and do. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is amazing that we're literally looking at the data that justifies zone 1, zone 2 work. And so, the NowWatch has a pretty cool platform. It's a very beautiful device. I mean, they've really embraced the fashion. When you wear it, it looks like this. You can't see it. That's what it looks like. So I have a silver disc in it. You can put different stones in the top of that. So it's kind of a sharp piece to wear. I had 2 people at Costco the other day stop me and say, "What is that?" So it's not like you're wearing a dork device like our old Polar stuff. But their app is coming. But the point I'm making is that we are, and as an exerciser or as an adult who's trying to extend health span to meet lifespan, you don't have to do CrossFit 6 days a week and wind up in a puddle of sweat in order to achieve your goal. Zone 1, zone 2 is incredibly beneficial. Give yourself the compassion necessary to do the work and not think that you have to run. Walk. Okay. This is one of the important things. And we're still figuring this out. As the technology improves, we're going to learn more. But what we do know is that we work that number up. So what are the things that improve HRV? Oh, let's go look at the 4 rocks. Do I exercise? Do I have movement? Am I getting nutrient dense food? Am I getting quality sleep? Am I getting light on my skin so I'm able to really get my mitochondria fired up? Do I have purpose? All of those things will yield an improved HRV.
That's amazing. It's funny, like the more recent running that I've been doing is I've been trying to aim for that zone 2, and I can't believe how much restraint there is involved in like really holding back. Like I'm someone who usually when I go for a run, I just want to like hit it hard and I want to pass people, and I don't like people passing me. And it's so funny. There's the mental games that go on
Right.
where you're like, geez, I'm really slow. And but what's interesting is that the difference in my HRV when I was doing these really hard runs to these more, it's I can't quite get into that zone 1, but it's more like a zone 3, mostly a little bit of zone 2. It's I've been noticing my actual heart rate drop in general despite holding that higher rhythm. So I'm seeing mitochondrial improvement regardless, but I'm assuming that probably a few weeks from now, maybe a couple months from now, that pace that I'm at probably will be zone 2, but I'm trying really hard to stay there, and it's phenomenal. I have so much more joy when I run. And even post run, the post run effect is phenomenal versus like this intense burnout of like, oh, I ran, but I feel like shit.
Nick, I've coached several people to half marathon times and marathon times, and inevitably when I start them, I give them a running plan, I give them their ceilings, and they'll come back to me. They said, "Listen, if I'm going to stay at that heart rate, I have to walk." And I'm like, "Then walk," and they don't get it. I'm like, "No, take the time, walk, bring it back down," and all of my clients hit their goals. Okay, simply because the math is fairly simple. We know the physiology. It's the psychology you got to deal with. You've got to get that feedback. You've got to get that scoreboard. And we typically exercise till we feel it.
Yeah.
Well, that feeling is cortisol. That feeling is we're creating lactate, we're driving cortisol, we're getting a dopamine response to that. That's what we're feeling. I get it, okay? And I understand that you like it, and I understand you may be addicted to it. But if you want to move the physiological markers, you got to get back down and play in these other zones and stay away from zone 4. Everything you can, avoid zone 4. Only go through it. It's either you're going to Vive and coming back down. But and there's reasons to do 5. I'm not saying 100% of the work down there in 1 and 2 and 3. There's reasons to do 5 to do intensity, but don't live in 4. You're going to tear yourself up.
Well, I think it's interesting too is like, when trying to get people moving again, it really makes it so easy because there's so much, I guess maybe early research with VO2 max and pushing it and just, playing in that zone 4 or 5, like you said. But the reality is most of the population, if they just establish that connection to zone 1 and zone 2, it would be an absolute game changer for their health. And it's just not talked about. I love that you're talking about this.
Have compassion for yourself. So many people start this and they get this disgust. Well, I can't even run a mile, or and I'm like, have compassion. Okay. If you didn't run a mile yesterday, you're going to have a hard time running a mile today. Okay. Take your time again. But now with wearable technology, we now have the ability to see the value of that 1-2 space. And I expect this to just continue to explode.
Yeah, I love that. David, go ahead, buddy.
Well, a couple of things, Don. I mean, earlier you were talking about how when you were discovering all these things and your athletes were getting these national titles and you were able to just measure it if they were capable of getting there, people were calling it voodoo, right? And I was kind of laughing because I'm thinking it's always voodoo until somebody comes forward and creates understanding of how they got there, right?
There you go.
And then I'm listening to you talk about this whole, you guys talking about the zone 1, zone 2 and optimizing those levels to build. And I'm thinking like this guy is like the pit boss at the Formula 1 races. Like you're the engineer guy that knows how the car needs to run for it to win the race, right? And
am I Christian Horner or am I Toto Wolff? Which one?
I don't know, man. You're all of them, man. It's just it's amazing to hear you talk about these things and to geek out on it because you've taken something that we couldn't see with this type of technology and you're showing people the capability of what it can show us, but then also showing us on this other end of you don't have to like kill yourself exercising these other things to get your health. And I think that's the beauty in what you just described right now is like you're going to get those gains in those types of zones, and it doesn't have to be like you're dying after you're done working out or you feel like
No.
you have to push yourself. I mean, and that I think people need to hear that, because I think people when they go exercise, they always feel like they have to push themselves out of that comfort zone, right, and exist in that comfort zone to make gains. But like, you know, I mean, you, I'm sure, understand this very well, and me and Nick talk about this all the time. But it's all about the recovery, like you were talking about. It's like, how do you maximize on that piece, and that's what gives you your health. That's what's gonna like
Right.
basically pay off for you in the end, right?
Well, our culture's so full of ex-Navy SEALs that are writing books, and we're looking at what they do for selection. You know, what Navy SEALs do in buds is not training. It's pure survival. It's
Yeah.
pure selection. Okay, that's all it is. It's not training. And if someone's bringing in an ex-Navy SEAL to put your team through a buds experience, you've missed it. Okay, you're off the tracks, on the wrong road. You know, completely. There's a good science to back, because all those guys that get through selection, this is where they go. Okay, this is what they do. And this is what's so important about this. So yeah, it's, you know, I'm all about authentic evidence. Okay, I don't think evidence has to be double blinded, peer reviewed in order to be valid. Okay, I believe if you wear a heart rate monitor during your run and you see that you're spending 60% of your time in zone 4, that's authentic evidence that you need to change something. Nick, if you want to do zone 1-2 work, get on a bike.
Yeah.
Okay. This is my number. When I'm training distance runners, triathletes are easy because they're already spending time on bike. But when I'm doing a distance runner, I get them on a trainer. I get them on a bike. That's where you get your zone 1-2 working. Get your headphones in, listen to a podcast, things like that. But that's how you get. It's hard to run in zone. You've got to be ridiculously fit to run in zone 2. Ridiculously. I would argue with Olympic trials coming up, you've basically got to be the condition of the distance people on our 2 national teams in order to be able to run in zone 2.
What do you think about a walk run?
Love it.
That's
love
okay.
It.
Yeah. Okay.
Love it. Yeah. I'll tell you.
I do love being outside. Like there's some, especially this time of year, you know, because the other thing I was going to set myself up for was on our treadmill, just doing a hike, even like we're doing like a steeper incline and slow pace, you know, to try to.
If it's a choice between a treadmill or a hike or we're outside, throw the treadmill away. Okay. Yeah, I'm not a huge treadmill fan. Yeah. Get outside, get in nature. Yeah. Spend the beginning of your run or the end of your run with your shoes off, walking in the grass, grounding as well. So you're accomplishing a couple goals. Okay. But I'm not a treadmill fan. I'm a huge fan of bicycles and bike ergometers. You can really move the needle with them. You can control workload very effectively. So that's why I like them so much. But you're right. It's just hard to run in zone 2. You probably have to have a VO2 in the 60s. Okay. Yeah,
which I don't.
And that's third standard deviation to the right. I mean, those are elite. Those are very elite runners.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, this conversation is so important on so many levels, but like, I think just really anchoring home for people that this is not a hard thing to do, and it's actually so enjoyable. Like, and it's with purpose. There's something about wearables that offer another level of consistency and commitment and discipline, because it's actually really fun to just operate with these numbers and see, like, because I mean, my Garmin will tell me like I spent too much time in zone 3, not enough time in zone 2. It'll tell you that feedback is incredible. On a daily basis now, I'm recommending people get wearables for these reasons, because it makes exercise more fun. It's much more predictable. You can analyze it. You can track it. It's so helpful. And I love this Now Watch. I've never seen it before. David, have you seen the Now Watch before? Well, maybe
to get that info from him.
Yeah.
Nowwatch.com, and if you use Don-50, you get a $50 discount if you buy it. So Again, I met their representative here in the States. They've got work to do on their app. Their app is not there yet.
Right.
And so I'll warn you on that right now. But the great thing is they're giving me data that no other wearable gives me. And I'm expecting an upgrade in that here at the end of the month. So, we can go back and revisit this at some time. I'll let you know what I find out. But if you want to wear a device that looks nice, and again, when I worked for Polar, I used to sit on airplanes and you looked on everybody's wrist coming in. So there wasn't an Apple Watch yet. So you're either wearing a Timex, a Rolex, or a Polar. And Garmin had that great big fat thick square running computer. You saw those every once in a while, but you'd figure out if someone was in your tribe, whether they had that Polar, because I'm not in the Rolex tribe. So you'd sit there and if I'd see the heart rate monitor, you kind of give them a hey, and so that's, well, the Now Watch it's a new tribe. That's
cool. That's really cool. There's so much more. We're gonna have to get you back on because I want to dive into spermidine, and I was hoping to hit some of that, but I'm so glad that we spent time talking about HRV and your product, because that hits home deeply for both David and I, and the spermidine will as well. So let's just get you back on for another one to dive into that. David, any closing remarks or anything that you want to shout out to before we sign off?
Don, lots of wisdom today, man. The rocks in the jar and the whole purpose piece. I mean, so important, and things that just people need to hear. And I really appreciate that wisdom for our listeners, because you just hit it on the head, man. Like, very straightforward, and it's things people need to hear.
Yeah, maybe that's what happens when you're seventh decade of life. Who knows? In another 10 years, what are we going to know then? So
that's true. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Don, anything else that you want to share? Like, maybe just remind people the websites. We'll add them in the show notes, and then we'll
so if you want to look at Mode Method, you go to modemethod.com. And I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll create a discount code for you guys. That you put it in the show notes. Is that what you want to do?
Yeah, we'll do that.
So if someone wants to try it, 15% off their first order, or subscription, and they can try it, and go from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, just a final note on the SPMs. We use a product through a company called Metagenics. They have a SPM active. Yeah. And the kind of stuff that I've seen it clean up in the body is phenomenal. So the fact that that's a part of this system, I really love that, because especially for the athlete, or forget about the athlete, just the individual that's stuck in an inflammatory state, it is profoundly effective for those people.
I'm getting my oils from the same lab that do Metagenics.
Interesting. Okay, good to know. That's awesome. Yeah,
it's a little different, but they're coming from the same labs in Spain.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Don, you're awesome, man. Such a wealth of information. I appreciate the discount link for the people too that are tuning in, and I'm looking forward to part 2.
Thanks. Wow, let's get it scheduled. I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please be sure to subscribe to the Dr. Dads and share with your family and friends. You can also follow and interact with Dr. Nick and Dr. David on Facebook and Instagram for a daily dose of inspiration and the latest in health and wellness. Be well.